A millionaire came home without notice and found the poor girl doing the unthinkable with his twin sons. Grayson Hale's chest tightened as he stood frozen at the threshold of his grand estate's nursery. The Italian marble beneath his feet felt like quicksand. He'd cut the Singapore business trip short after closing the pharmaceutical deal 2 days early. Something had pulled him home, a gnawing feeling he couldn't shake, like a wolf sensing danger in the wind. His 7-year-old twin sons, Callan and Joran, were on their knees, clutching the small wrists of a frail, dirt-stained girl. Their voices cracked through tears as they begged, "Please don't leave us. Please, we can't lose you too." Grayson's blood turned to ice. The girl couldn't be more than 10, her dark hair matted, her clothes torn and filthy like she'd been living on the streets. How had she gotten into his mansion? Past the security gates, the cameras, the motion sensors that cost more than most people's homes? But it wasn't her presence that stopped his heart cold. It was the way his sons clung to her, like she was their lifeline. Like losing her would shatter what little remained of their broken world. "Boys, step away from." The words died in his throat. The girl, barely 10 years old, lifted a tarnished silver locket she had been hiding against her chest. Her tiny fingers trembled as she pried it open, and when it swung wide, the photograph inside made Grayson stagger backward like he'd been punched. It was his late wife, Ilara, radiant, exhausted, glowing with new motherhood as she smiled at the camera from her hospital bed. In her arms, she cradled the twins as newborns, Callan and Joran, tiny and perfect. Yet nestled between them was another infant he had never seen before. A baby girl with olive skin and a shock of dark hair. A child who shouldn't exist. "That's impossible," Grayson whispered, his voice barely audible over the thundering of his own heartbeat. The poor girl whispered through sobs, "That baby was me. I'm your daughter too." The locket slipped from her grasp, hitting the Persian rug with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot in the suffocating silence. The twins looked between their father and the girl they'd apparently been hiding, confusion and terror written across their young faces. Grayson's mind reeled. Daughter? Ilara had carried triplets? How was that even possible? They'd been together through every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, every moment of her pregnancy. There had been no secrets between them. There couldn't have been. But looking at this broken child, now really looking, he saw it. The stubborn tilt of her chin that matched his own. The deep brown eyes that were identical to Ilara's. The way she held her shoulders, proud despite her obvious poverty. Exactly like his wife used to when she was fighting for something she believed in. "You're lying," he breathed. But even as the words left his mouth, they felt like ash. The girl's chin trembled, but her voice stayed steady. "She gave me away the day we were born. Said she couldn't keep all three. Said I was the extra one." If this shocking revelation stunned you, subscribe now. You won't want to miss how this impossible family's secret tears apart everything Grayson thought he knew. 3 months earlier, Grayson Hale's world had been picture perfect. Billions in pharmaceutical patents, a mansion that graced magazine covers, and twin sons who were his pride and joy. Ilara had been gone for 2 years, claimed by the same cancer his company was now racing to cure, but they'd found their rhythm. Father and sons healing together. Then the nightmares started. Callan woke, screaming about a sister in the dark. Joran drew pictures of 3 children instead of 2, claiming Mama had told him in his dreams. The family therapist called it manifestation of grief. Children creating imaginary siblings to fill the void left by their mother's death. Grayson threw himself deeper into work. His latest acquisition, a struggling biotech firm with promising research, demanded 18-hour days. Board meetings in Tokyo, lab inspections in Switzerland, investor dinners that stretched past midnight. Anything to avoid those knowing looks from his 7-year-olds, as if they could see something he couldn't. The mansion felt different when he returned from trips now. Too quiet, but also expectant, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Mrs. Chun, their longtime housekeeper, started acting strange too. leaving extra food in the kitchen, asking odd questions about whether he'd noticed anything unusual. Once he caught her staring at the family portrait in the hallway, the one of him, Alara, and the newborn twins, with tears in her eyes. "Is everything all right?" he'd asked. She'd wiped her face quickly, nodding. "Just missing Mrs. Alara, sir. She was a good woman. Sometimes people make impossible choices for love." At the time, he'd assumed she meant Alara's decision to refuse the experimental treatments that might have saved her life but would have meant months away from the boys. Now, those words felt loaded with meaning he'd missed. The twins had been spending more time in their old nursery lately. The room Alara had decorated with such care, painting murals of sailing ships and distant castles. He'd thought about converting it to a playroom, but something always stopped him. The boys claimed they liked to remember Mama there, sitting among the rocking chairs and mobile of dancing elephants. He should have paid closer attention to what they were remembering. Yesterday, Callan had asked if poor children could find families who love them. Joran had wondered aloud whether street kids ever got to live in big houses. Innocent questions, or so Grayson had thought. He'd answered absently while reviewing merger documents, promising they'd discuss charity work when he returned from Singapore. Now, he realized those weren't random thoughts. They weren't preparing to help others. They'd been preparing to help her, his daughter. The child Alara had somehow hidden from him for 10 years, living in shadows while her brothers grew up in luxury. The missing piece that explained why the twins sometimes stared at empty spaces like someone should be standing there. But if she was here now, dirty and desperate and breaking his son's hearts with her need to leave, then something had gone terribly wrong. And Grayson was about to discover that some family secrets don't just change the past, they destroy the future. 3 days before Grayson found her in the nursery, Annalise Kozlov had stood outside the towering iron gates of the Hale estate, clutching the silver locket like a lifeline. The October rain hammered down in sheets, soaking through her threadbare jacket and turning the gravel driveway into a muddy stream. She'd been walking for 6 hours since the city bus had dropped her at the edge of Beacon Hill, following the GPS coordinates she'd memorized from the torn piece of paper in her foster mother's jewelry box. Her fingers were numb around the locket's chain. 10 years she'd carried it, hidden beneath her clothes, never daring to open it until 3 weeks ago, when everything fell apart. The security camera above the gate swiveled toward her, its red light blinking like an angry eye. Through the intercom, a man's voice crackled to life. "This is private property. Move along." Annalise stepped closer to the speaker, rain dripping from her dark hair. "I need to see Grayson Hale. It's about his wife. About Alara." Silence stretched for 30 seconds. Then, "Kid, I don't know what game you're playing, but Mrs. Hale passed away 2 years ago. Get lost before I call the police." Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was her only chance. The foster family that had taken her in after the fire had made it clear she was aging out of the system in 2 months, and they wouldn't let her stay past her 18th birthday. The streets were calling, and she'd seen what happened to kids like her out there. Wait. She pressed the locket against the camera lens, prying it open with shaking fingers. "Look at this picture. Please. Just look." The silence lasted longer this time. She could almost hear the guard's sharp intake of breath through the speaker. "Where did you get that?" "She was my mother too," Annalise whispered. "The third baby. The one he doesn't know about." The gate clicked open. 20 minutes later, she sat in the mansion's marble foyer, dripping rainwater onto a rug that probably cost more than most people's cars. The head of security, a gruff man named Torres, stood across from her with his arms crossed, studying her face like he was solving a puzzle. "Boss isn't due back from Singapore for 2 days," he said. "But those kids, they've been asking about you." Her breath caught. "They know about me? They dream about you. Wake up crying, asking where their sister went." Torres shook his head. Thought it was grief talking. "Maybe we were wrong." He handed her a towel, his expression softening slightly. "You can stay until he gets home." But if you're running some kind of con, kid, I'm not. She clutched the locket tighter. I just want to know why she gave me away. Why I wasn't good enough to keep. Why would a billionaire trust a poor girl with just a locket? Stay tuned. What Annalise didn't know was that upstairs, two 7-year-olds had been watching from their bedroom window, and they were about to change everything. The moment Callan and Joran saw Annalise through their bedroom window, something clicked into place, like finding a puzzle piece that had been missing their whole lives. They crept downstairs while Torres was making phone calls, their bare feet silent against the marble stairs. Alara had taught them to move like ghosts through the mansion when Daddy was working late, a game that had become survival after she died. Annalise sat hunched in the library, still dripping wet, staring at a photo album she'd found on the side table. Photos of their mother, radiant and pregnant, her hands resting on her swollen belly. "You're her," Callan whispered from the doorway. She startled, nearly dropping the album. Two identical faces peered at her, sandy hair, bright blue eyes, and expressions of wonder that made her chest ache. "You're our sister," Joran added, stepping forward. "We knew you were real." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Annalise nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't think. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." The twins launched themselves at her like she was home base in a game of tag. Small arms wrapped around her neck, faces pressed against her shoulders, and for the first time in 10 years, Annalise felt like she belonged somewhere. "Why did you take so long to find us?" Callan demanded, pulling back to study her face. "Where have you been living?" Joran's voice cracked with emotion. "Were people mean to you?" She couldn't answer. How do you explain foster homes and group facilities and families who saw you as a paycheck to children who'd never known anything but love and luxury? Instead, she did what came naturally. She listened. The twins talked over each other, filling her in on 7 years of birthday parties and summer camps, scraped knees and bedtime stories, all the moments she'd missed. But underneath their chatter, she heard the grief. The holes their mother's death had torn in their perfect world. "Sometimes we pretend she's still here," Callan confided. "In the nursery. We sit in her rocking chair and remember her voice." "She sang to us," Joran added. "Lullabies about sailing ships and brave knights." Annalise's breath caught. "I know that song." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. About the princess who saved her kingdom with kindness instead of swords. The twins stared at her in amazement. "How do you know?" "Because I dream about it," she almost said. "Because sometimes I wake up humming melodies I've never heard, like they're buried in my bones." "She must have sung it to me too," she whispered instead. Before she gave me away." They spent the afternoon in the nursery, 3 children sharing pieces of a mother they'd all lost in different ways. The twins showed her Alara's murals, her books, her jewelry box full of treasures. And slowly, carefully, Annalise began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found her way home. But when Torres found them curled up together on the nursery floor, sharing whispered secrets and childhood dreams, his expression turned troubled. "Your father's coming home early," he told the twins. And when he sees this, everything was about to change, and none of them were ready for the storm that was coming. Dahlia Chun had worked for the Hale family for 15 years. She'd been there when Alara first brought the twins home from the hospital, exhausted but glowing with new motherhood. She'd held Grayson's hand at the funeral, watching him crumble as they lowered his wife into the ground. And she'd been the one to find Alara's final letter, hidden in the baby book she'd kept locked away. Now, watching this strange girl bond with the twins like she belonged here, Dahlia's stomach churned with dread. "Sir, we need to talk." She cornered Grayson in his study an hour after he'd discovered Annalise in the nursery. "Before this goes any further." Grayson sat behind his mahogany desk, the locket open in his palm, staring at the impossible photograph. "She has Alara's eyes. Her stubborn chin. How is that possible?" Because she's exactly who she says she is. Dahlia's voice was tight with controlled emotion. Mrs. Ilara's third baby. The one she couldn't keep. The locket snapped shut with a sharp click. You knew. I suspected. Dahlia twisted her hands in her apron. Mrs. Ilara was different after the birth. Sad in ways that went deeper than normal baby blues. She'd cry when she thought no one was watching, holding the twins like she was saying goodbye. Why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? That your wife gave away your child without your knowledge? That she lived with that secret every day until cancer took her? Dahlia's composure cracked. She made me promise never to speak of it. Said it would destroy you. Grayson stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the gardens where his sons were teaching Annalise to play catch. 3 children laughing in the fading afternoon light, like the family portrait they should have been all along. She's dangerous, sir. Dahlia's warning cut through his thoughts like ice. Not because she's lying, because she's telling the truth. What's that supposed to mean? Think about what happens next. The media finds out Grayson Hale has a secret daughter who's been living in poverty for 10 years while he built his empire. The board of directors starts asking questions about what else you might be hiding. Your competitors smell blood in the water. Grayson's jaw tightened. He'd built his pharmaceutical company on trust and transparency, values that had made him billions, but also made him vulnerable. One scandal could topple everything he'd worked for. And there's something else. Dahlia pulled a worn envelope from her pocket. I found this in Mrs. Ilara's things after she passed. I was going to burn it, but what? But maybe she's here for a reason. Maybe some secrets are meant to come out. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in his hands, and Grayson knew that whatever was inside would either save his family or destroy it forever. That night, while the twins slept peacefully for the first time in months, Annalise sat alone in the guest room Grayson had reluctantly given her. The 4-poster bed was bigger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, but she couldn't bring herself to lie down on the pristine white sheets. She was examining the locket again, running her fingers over its tarnished surface, when something shifted inside. A tiny click, so soft she almost missed it. Her heart stopped. There was a hidden compartment. With shaking hands, she pried at the back panel until it popped open, revealing a space barely large enough for a folded piece of paper. The note was yellow with age, written in handwriting she'd seen in the photo albums downstairs. Her mother's handwriting. My dearest Grayson, if you are reading this, then she found her way home to you, just as I always prayed she would. I know you must hate me for what I did, keeping her from you, giving her away like she meant nothing. But she meant everything. That's why I had to let her go. The doctor said carrying triplets would kill me. My heart couldn't handle it. When they told me to reduce the pregnancy to save my life, I couldn't choose which baby to lose. So I chose myself instead. I carried them all to term, knowing it might be my last gift to you. But when they were born, I was so weak, so close to dying, that I panicked. I thought if I kept all 3, I might leave you with nothing. So I kept our boys and gave our girl to Rosa, my friend from nursing school. I told you she was stillborn. I've regretted it every day since. Watched you grieve a daughter you never got a hold while she grew up thinking she was unwanted. I tried to bring her home so many times, but Rosa said she was happy, settled. That disrupting her life would only cause more pain. I was a coward, my love. I chose the easy lie over the hard truth, and now it's too late for me to fix it. If ever she comes looking, tell her the truth. Tell her she is yours. Tell her she was loved so much that I was willing to break my own heart to give her a chance at life. She is the missing piece of our family. She always was. All my love, Ilara. P.S. Her real name is Annalise Rosehale. She deserves to know who she really is. The letter fluttered to the floor as Annalise covered her mouth, stifling a sob that threatened to tear her apart. All these years, she'd thought she wasn't wanted, that she was the extra child, the burden, the mistake. But she'd been loved. chosen, protected by a mother who'd sacrificed everything to give her life. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Annalise. Grayson's voice was rough with emotion. "We need to talk." She looked down at the letter, at the proof of who she really was, and made a choice that would change everything. A hidden note could heal or destroy a family. What would you do? Comment, reveal, or hide? Tomorrow, she'd learn that some truths are worth the chaos they cause, and some families are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Annalise's hand was reaching for the door handle when it turned from the other side. But instead of Grayson, Dahlia Chen stepped into the room, her face pale as moonlight. "Don't." The housekeeper's voice was barely a whisper. "Don't show him that letter. Not yet." Annalise clutched the note protectively against her chest. "Why?" "It proves everything. It proves I belong here. It proves your mother lied to him for 7 years." Dahlia closed the door softly behind her. "Do you understand what that means?" Grayson built his entire empire on trust. His pharmaceutical company, his reputation, his relationships with investors. Everything depends on his word being gold. If this gets out, then what? Annalise's chin lifted with the same stubborn defiance that had marked both her parents. "He pretends I don't exist, ships me back to foster care, and tells the twins their sister was just a dream." Dahlia's expression cracked. "Child, you don't understand the world he lives in. Billionaires don't get to have messy family secrets without consequences." But they weren't alone. Through the paper-thin walls of the guest room, 2 7-year-olds pressed their ears against the hallway door, having snuck out of bed when they heard voices. Every word hit them like a physical blow. Their mother had lied. Their sister was real, but she might disappear again. And it was all because of money, the thing that had never mattered to them, but seemed to matter more than family to everyone else. Callan grabbed Joran's hand, and they crept back to their room, minds racing. Meanwhile, downstairs in his study, Grayson stared at the envelope Dahlia had given him earlier. His name was written across the front in Alara's elegant script, but his hands shook too badly to open it. The door burst open without warning. "Daddy." Callan's voice cracked with desperation. "You can't send her away. We heard everything." Joran added, tears streaming down his face. "Mama lied, but Annalise didn't. She's our sister, and we love her." Grayson's heart shattered as his sons threw themselves at him, clinging like he was the only thing standing between them and another devastating loss. "She makes the nightmare stop," Callan sobbed against his father's chest. "When she's here, we don't dream about being alone anymore." "Please, Daddy," Joran begged. "Don't let the money people take her away. We need her." In that moment, holding his broken sons while his world crumbled around him, Grayson finally understood what Alara had meant in all those cryptic conversations about impossible choices. Sometimes love demanded sacrifices that logic couldn't justify. He looked at the unopened letter, then at the faces of the children who trusted him to protect them, and made a decision that would either save his family or destroy everything he'd built. Should he risk everything to embrace the girl? Subscribe and find out. But first, he had to read his dead wife's final confession, and some truths are too big to face alone. 3 hours later, Grayson sat alone in his study. Alara's letter spread across his desk like evidence at a crime scene. He'd read it 17 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. "I chose the easy lie over the hard truth." The brandy in his glass had gone warm, untouched, while his mind reeled through the implications. 10 years. For 10 years, he'd grieved a daughter who was alive, while she grew up thinking she was unwanted. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. But underneath his shock and anger was something worse: understanding. He remembered those first terrifying weeks after the twins were born. Alara had been so weak, barely clinging to life, while he juggled newborn care and the company crisis that had nearly bankrupted them. If she told him about a third baby then, when everything was chaos and they were both drowning, would he have been strong enough to handle it? Or would the weight of 3 children and a dying wife have crushed him completely? A soft knock interrupted his spiral. "Come in." Dahlia entered carrying a tea service, her movements careful and deliberate. "The children are finally asleep. Together in the nursery. They refused to separate." Of course they did. He rubbed his temples, feeling every one of his 35 years. "Dahlia, I need you to tell me everything. Every suspicion, every hint, every moment you thought something was wrong." She set the tea down and took the chair across from him, a liberty she'd never taken in 15 years of service. But tonight wasn't about protocol. "Mrs. Alara cried for weeks after the birth," she began quietly. "Not normal postpartum sadness, but grief. Deep, soul-crushing grief. She'd hold the twins and whisper apologies to someone who wasn't there. Why didn't I see it? Because she didn't want you to. You were juggling the company merger and 2 newborns. She was protecting you the only way she knew how, by carrying the burden alone." The words hit him like physical blows. Alara had always been like that, shouldering pain so others wouldn't have to. It's what had made her an incredible wife and mother, and ultimately, what had killed her. "What happens now?" he asked. "If the board finds out I have a secret daughter who's been living in poverty while I donated millions to children's charities? If the media gets hold of this story?" Dahlia's expression hardened. "Then you'll face the consequences like a man who puts his family first." "It's not that simple. If the company collapses, what happens to the hundreds of families depending on those jobs? The research that could save lives? The 3 children upstairs who need their father to choose them over everything else." Dahlia stood, her tone sharp with decades of suppressed frustration. "Sir, with all due respect, you're not God. You can't save everyone, but you can save them." After she left, Grayson walked to his window and stared out at the gardens where his children had played that afternoon. 3 children. His children. In the distance, he could see the lights of Boston twinkling like fallen stars, representing the empire he'd built from nothing. Everything he'd worked for balanced on a knife's edge, and the choice he made in the next 24 hours would determine whether his family emerged whole or shattered beyond repair. But as he stood there in the darkness, weighing love against legacy, he realized Alara had already shown him the answer. Some choices were worth any price. By morning, the carefully constructed silence around the Hale family began to crack. It started with Torres, the head of security, who'd called his wife after his shift ended and mentioned the strange girl with the locket. His wife told her sister, who worked at the country club where half of Beacon Hill's elite gathered for their morning tennis matches. "Did you hear? Grayson Hale has a secret daughter." Impossible. We would have known. Apparently not. Poor thing showed up at his gates in the rain, looking like a street kid. Mrs. Patterson, who'd never liked the Hales' rise from middle class to billionaire status, leaned in with poorly concealed delight. "I always said there was something off about that marriage. Too perfect, too fairy tale. Where there's smoke." The whispers spread like wildfire through the interconnected web of staff, neighbors, and social climbers who fed on scandal like sharks sensing blood. By noon, 3 reporters had called the mansion's main line. By 2 o'clock, a photographer was stationed across from the front gates. Inside the mansion, the staff moved with nervous energy. The cook burned lunch. The gardener trimmed the same hedge 3 times. Everyone knew something momentous was happening, but no one dared ask direct questions. Everyone except Torres. "Sir, we got a problem," he told Grayson as they stood in the security office, watching monitors that showed news vans gathering like vultures down the street. "Someone leaked the story. Channel 7 is running a segment tonight called The Billionaire's Hidden Child." Grayson's jaw tightened. How much do they know? Enough to be dangerous. They're calling it a Cinderella story with a dark twist. Asking questions about where she's been living, why you abandoned her, whether there are other secrets. Through the window, they could see Annalise in the garden with the twins, teaching them to braid flower crowns. an image so pure and innocent it made the approaching media circus feel obscene. "They don't know about the letter?" Grayson asked. "Not yet. But they're digging. I've got contacts at the major papers. This is bigger than local news now. By tomorrow it'll be national." Grayson watched his daughter laugh at something Callan said, her face lighting up with joy he'd never seen before. She'd spent one night in a real family, and already she looked different. Hopeful. "Home, sir," Torres prompted. "What are your orders?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. In 6 hours, his carefully constructed world would be dissected on national television. His company's stock would fluctuate with every speculation. His competitors would circle like predators. And somewhere in the chaos, 3 children who'd finally found each other would be forced to pay the price for adult choices made before they were old enough to understand them. But as Grayson watched Annalise place a flower crown on Joran's head while Callan applauded, he realized the real question wasn't what the media would do to him. It was what he was willing to do for them. That evening, while the media circus gathered strength outside their gates, something magical happened in the mansion's nursery. For the first time in 2 years, bedtime wasn't a battle. Annalise sat cross-legged on the soft carpet between the twins' beds, a worn book of fairy tales open in her lap. Callan and Joran hung on every word as she read about brave princesses and enchanted forests, her voice carrying the same melodic cadence that Alara had once used. "Read the one about the lost princess," Joran requested when she finished the story of the shoemaker's elves. "Which lost princess?" Annalise asked, though she was already turning to the page she somehow knew they wanted. "The one who comes home," Callan said softly. "Mama used to say it was about you." Annalise's breath caught, but she began to read about a princess who'd been separated from her family as a baby, raised by strangers who never quite understood her magic. The princess spent years searching for where she belonged, following stars and dreams and the pull of her heart, until finally, she found her brothers waiting for her, Annalise read, her voice thick with emotion. "And they all lived happily ever after." "Do you think that's really how it ends?" Joran asked, climbing out of his bed to curl up beside her. Callan joined them, creating a small huddle of siblings in the soft lamplight. "Do you think we get to live happily ever after too?" Annalise closed the book and pulled them closer, marveling at how perfectly they fit against her sides. I think sometimes the best stories are the ones we write ourselves." "Will you stay?" Callan's voice was so small, so vulnerable, that it broke her heart. "Even if the scary people with cameras try to take you away." She thought of the reporters outside, of Dahlia's warnings, of the empire that might crumble because she dared to come home. But looking at these 2 beautiful boys who'd claimed her as their sister without hesitation, the choice seemed simple. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. "We're family, real family, and families stick together." They talked until their eyelids grew heavy, sharing stories and secrets and dreams. Joran confessed that he still slept with the stuffed elephant Alara had given him. Callan admitted he sometimes pretended their mother was just on a long trip and would come back soon. Annalise told them about the foster families who tried their best but never felt like home, and how she'd always known something was missing. "We were missing," Joran said matter-of-factly. "And you were missing too." As the twins finally drifted off to sleep, Annalise remained on the floor between their beds, watching their peaceful faces in the dim light. For the first time in her life, she understood what people meant when they talked about unconditional love. But outside their cocoon of newfound family, the storm was building. And tomorrow, they'd all learn whether love was enough to weather what was coming. Downstairs, Grayson stood in his study with a phone in his hand and a decision that would change everything. The number on the screen belonged to his publicist, and one call would either save his empire or sacrifice it for something more precious than money. His children were finally whole. The question was, would he be brave enough to fight for them? While the Hale family slept peacefully for the first time in years, Dahlia Chun paced her small quarters above the garage, her mind churning with dark possibilities. She'd served this family faithfully for 15 years, watching Grayson build his empire from a small pharmaceutical startup into a billion-dollar corporation. She'd held Alara's hand through morning sickness, helped raise the twins from infants, and kept every family secret locked in her heart. But this girl, this living reminder of Alara's betrayal, threatened everything. Dahlia pulled out her laptop and began typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard with surgical precision. If Annalise thought she could waltz into their lives and claim a piece of the hail fortune, she had another thing coming. 20 minutes of searching revealed what she'd suspected. Annalise Kozlov had aged out of the Massachusetts foster system 6 months ago. No permanent address since then. No employment records. No trace of her existence, until she'd appeared at their gates like some kind of ghost. But it was the next search result that made Dahlia's blood run cold. A news article from 3 weeks ago. Fire destroys low-income housing complex in Dorchester. 12 families displaced, 1 casualty. The casualty was listed as Rosa Martinez, 68, former nurse at Boston General Hospital. Rosa Martinez, the name from Alara's letter, the friend who'd taken Annalise as a baby. Dahlia's hands shook as she cross-referenced the dates. Rosa had died exactly 3 weeks ago, the same time frame when Annalise would have discovered the locket, the letter, the truth about her parentage. Too convenient. Too perfectly timed. What if this wasn't about a lost daughter finding her family? What if this was about a desperate girl with nothing to lose, seizing an opportunity when her only guardian died and left her with evidence she could use? Dahlia opened a new browser window and began researching private investigators. If Annalise was running a con, there would be evidence. There had to be. But as she scrolled through websites and contact numbers, a darker thought crept into her mind. Even if Annalise was telling the truth, even if she really was Alara's daughter, did that matter? The girl was still a threat, still a walking scandal waiting to explode, still capable of destroying everything Grayson had worked for. And Dahlia had spent too many years protecting this family to let it all crumble now. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in 5 years. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. Vincenzo here. Vinny, it's Dahlia Chun. I need a favor. Dahlia? Christ, it's been forever. What kind of favor? She stared out her window at the mansion where 3 children slept peacefully, unaware that their newfound happiness balanced on a knife's edge. The kind that keeps a family safe, she said quietly. There's a girl here, a problem that needs to disappear. How permanently are we talking? Dahlia closed her eyes, hating herself for what she was about to do. But sometimes love meant making impossible choices, just like Alara had taught her, just long enough to save them from themselves. As she hung up the phone, Dahlia tried to ignore the voice in her head that whispered she was about to become the very monster she was trying to protect them from. But some prices were worth paying to keep a family whole, even if it meant breaking her own heart in the process. The next morning, while Grayson fielded frantic calls from his board of directors and the twins played in the garden under Torres's watchful eye, Annalise found herself alone in Alara's old studio. The room had been sealed since her death, preserved exactly as she'd left it. Canvases covered with half-finished paintings lined the walls, seascapes and portraits, dreams captured in oil and watercolor. But it was the desk in the corner that drew Annalise like a magnet. The drawers were locked, but grief and time had warped the wood. A gentle push, and the bottom drawer slid open with a soft creak. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, was a photo album she'd never seen before. Her hands trembled as she opened the cover. The first page took her breath away. It was Alara in a hospital bed, exhausted but radiant, holding 3 babies. Not the posed professional newborn photos that graced the mansion's hallways, but raw, intimate moments captured by someone who loved her deeply. Grayson, looking impossibly young and terrified, cradling 2 infants, while tears streamed down his face. Alara whispering to a third baby, a dark-haired girl with olive skin who could only be Annalise. She flipped the page. More photos. The 3 babies sleeping together in a single bassinet. Alara feeding them in rotation, her face a mask of love and exhaustion. Grayson passed out in a chair, still holding 2 bottles, while the third lay forgotten on his lap. But as the pages progressed, the photos changed. Fewer shots of the dark-haired baby. More space between her and her siblings in group photos. Until finally, she disappeared altogether. The last photo in the album showed Alara in a different hospital room, holding only the twins. Her face was ravaged by grief, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stared at the camera like she was saying goodbye to more than just the photographer. On the back in Alara's handwriting, "The day I chose wrong. God forgive me." Annalise's vision blurred as she realized what she was seeing. This wasn't just proof of her parentage. It was documentation of a mother's heartbreak, evidence of the impossible choice that had torn Alara apart and ultimately killed her. She flipped to the very last page and found something that made her heart stop. An envelope marked for Annalise when she comes home. Inside was a birth certificate, her real birth certificate, not the amended one she'd grown up with that listed Rosa Martinez as her mother, but the original document that told the truth. Father, Grayson Alexander Hale. Mother, Alara Rose Hale, née Crawford. Child, Annalise Rose Hale. She was real. She was theirs. She belonged here. But underneath the birth certificate was something else, a letter in handwriting she didn't recognize. The letterhead made her blood run cold. Blackwood and Associates, Private Investigation Services. The first line hit her like a physical blow. Regarding your inquiry into the whereabouts of Annalise Rose Hale, presumed deceased. The letter was dated 3 months ago. Someone had been looking for her recently, and they thought she was dead. As footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, Annalise clutched the documents to her chest, her mind racing. Who had been searching for her? And why had they believed she was gone? More importantly, what would happen when they discovered she was very much alive? You have no right to be in here. Dahlia's voice cut through the morning silence like a blade. She stood in the studio doorway, her face twisted with an emotion Annalise had never seen before, cold, calculated rage. This room is sacred, Dahlia continued, stepping inside and closing the door behind her with deliberate softness. Mrs. Alara's private space, not for little girls playing dress-up in other people's lives. Annalise clutched the photo album protectively. These are pictures of me, of my family. I have every right. Your family. Dahlia's laugh was sharp and bitter. Child, you've been here 3 days. 3 days. And you think you can walk into a home that's been built over 15 years and claim it as yours? I'm not claiming anything. Annalise's voice shook, but she stood her ground. I'm his daughter. The birth certificate proves. Papers can be forged. Dahlia moved closer, her eyes fixed on the documents in Annalise's hands. Desperate people do desperate things when they have nothing left to lose. The accusation hit like a slap. You think I'm lying? I think you're a scared little girl who lost her guardian and saw an opportunity. Dahlia's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout. I think you found some old papers in Rosa Martinez's belongings and decided to spin a fairy tale. Annalise's blood turned to ice. How do you know Rosa's name? I know a lot of things. Dahlia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, including the fact that she died in a fire 3 weeks ago. Convenient timing, don't you think? Before Annalise could respond, the studio door burst open. Callan and Joran tumbled inside, their faces flushed from running. Annalise. Callan panted. We've been looking everywhere for. He stopped mid-sentence, sensing the tension in the room. Joran moved protectively in front of his sister, his small chin jutting out with familiar Hale stubbornness. Why are you being mean to her, Mrs. Chun? I'm trying to protect this family, Dahlia said, her voice softening slightly for the twins. Sometimes that means making hard choices about who belongs here and who doesn't. She belongs here. Callan's voice cracked with emotion. She's our sister. She has Mama's eyes and Daddy's chin, and she knows all our favorite stories. Children see what they want to see, Dahlia replied. But adults have to look deeper. What's going on here? Grayson's voice cut through the argument like thunder. He stood in the doorway, his presence filling the small space with authority and barely controlled anger. His eyes swept the room, taking in Dahlia's aggressive stance, Annalise's tear-streaked face, and his sons positioned like tiny bodyguards. Dahlia, his voice was dangerously quiet, explain to me why you're interrogating a child in my wife's studio. Sir, I was just. You were just what? Intimidating a 10-year-old girl? Accusing her of fraud? In the room where my wife painted lullabies on the walls for the children she loved. Dahlia's composure cracked. I'm trying to save you from making a mistake that will destroy everything you've built. The only mistake, Grayson said, stepping fully into the room, is mine, for not seeing what was right in front of me. His eyes found the photo album in Annalise's hands, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, understanding, and finally, acceptance. Show me, he said softly. Show me everything. With shaking hands, Annalise opened the photo album to the first page and held it out to Grayson. His sharp intake of breath told her everything she needed to know. I remember this, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The nurse took it right after you were born. All three of you together for the first and last time. He sank into Alara's old painting chair, suddenly looking every one of his 35 years. The twins moved to flank him, while Annalise remained standing, uncertain. I don't understand, Grayson continued, turning the pages with reverent fingers. The doctor said they told me the third baby didn't make it, that there were complications. Mama lied, Joran said simply. But she did it because she loved us. Annalise pulled out Alara's final letter, the one from the locket, and placed it in Grayson's hands. She explained everything. She thought keeping me would kill her, and losing all of us would kill you. As Grayson read his dead wife's confession, tears rolled down his cheeks unchecked. Dahlia watched from the corner, her face pale, as 15 years of loyalty crumbled beneath the weight of truth. She gave you to Rosa, Grayson said when he finished reading. Rosa Martinez. I remember her. She worked in the NICU when you were born. Alara trusted her. Rosa raised me, Annalise confirmed. She was good to me. But she died in a fire 3 weeks ago. And that's when I found the locket and the letters, and I had nowhere else to go. Grayson looked at the birth certificate, running his thumb over the official seal. Annalise Rose Hale. We named you after Alara's grandmother. Sir, Dahlia interrupted, her voice desperate now. You can't seriously believe. What can I believe? Grayson's tone turned sharp. That my wife, dying of grief and terror, made an impossible choice to save her children? That the girl who looks exactly like my mother and has Alara's stubborn spirit might actually be my daughter. He stood, still holding the documents, and really looked at Annalise for the first time since she'd arrived. Not as an intruder or a threat, but as his child. You have my mother's nose, he said softly. And Alara's laugh. I heard it yesterday in the garden when you were teaching the boys to braid flowers. Daddy, Callan tugged at his sleeve. Does this mean she gets to stay forever? Grayson knelt down to his son's level, including Annalise in his gaze. It means we're a family. A real family. All 4 of us. He opened his arms, and for a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Annalise took a tentative step forward, then another, until she was folding into the embrace she'd dreamed of her entire life. The twins squeezed in from both sides, and for the first time in 10 years, the Hale family was complete. Would you embrace a child you never knew existed? Subscribe to see his choice. But outside the studio, Dahlia pulled out her phone with shaking fingers. There was still time to make the call that would end this fairy tale before it could destroy them all. Some decisions, once made, could never be undone. That evening, as the autumn sun painted the mansion in golden light, Callan and Joran crept down the hallway toward their father's study. They'd been sent to bed an hour ago, but sleep felt impossible when their world had just been rebuilt from the ground up. The study door was slightly ajar, and through the crack they could see Grayson sitting across from Annalise. She looked so small in the massive leather chair, her feet barely touching the floor, but her spine was straight with a kind of dignity that couldn't be taught. "I need you to understand something," Grayson was saying, his voice carrying the weight of a promise. "I failed you once. I wasn't there when you needed a father, when you were scared and alone and wondering why nobody came for you." Annalise's voice was barely audible. "You didn't know I existed. That doesn't matter." Grayson leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "A father's job is to protect his children, all of them. I should have asked harder questions when the doctor said we lost you. I should have demanded to see your body, insisted on answers that made sense." The twins pressed closer to the door, their hearts hammering. "But you couldn't have known," Annalise insisted. "Mama made sure of that." Ilara was dying and terrified. Grayson's voice cracked slightly. "She made an impossible choice with the information she had. But I'm alive, and I'm here now, and I swear to you, on my life, on everything I've built, I will never fail you again." Callan grabbed Joran's hand, tears spilling down both their faces as they listened to their father make the promise they'd been desperate to hear. "The media will come after us," Grayson continued. "They'll say terrible things, ask invasive questions, try to tear apart everything we've found together. Some of my business relationships might suffer. The board might lose confidence. Maybe I should go," Annalise whispered. "Find somewhere else." "No." The word came out sharp as gunshot. "You are my daughter. This is your home. We are your family. And families don't abandon each other when things get difficult." Through the crack in the door, they could see Grayson move to kneel in front of Annalise's chair, taking her small hands in his much larger ones. "I know I can't replace the 10 years we lost," he said softly. "I can't undo the foster homes, or the loneliness, or the nights you went to bed wondering if anyone in the world loved you. But I can give you the rest of your life. I can give you brothers who worship you, a home that will always be yours, and a father who will move heaven and earth to make sure you never feel unwanted again." "Do you mean it?" Annalise's voice broke on the words. "I've never meant anything more." The twins watched as their sister, their real actual sister, fell into their father's arms, both of them crying tears that washed away 10 years of grief and separation. "We have a sister," Joran whispered to Callan as they crept back toward their rooms. "We always did," Callan replied. "We just didn't know where to find her." That night, for the first time since their mother died, the twins fell asleep without nightmares, because their family was finally truly complete. But downstairs, Dahlia was making calls that would test every promise Grayson had just made. The next morning, Grayson found Dahlia in the kitchen, mechanically preparing breakfast, as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis the day before. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. She didn't look up from the eggs she was scrambling. "If this is about yesterday, I was only trying to protect." "I know exactly what you were trying to do." Grayson's voice was dangerously quiet. "Torres showed me the phone records. 3 calls to Vincenzo Marchetti last night." Dahlia's spatula froze mid-stir. "Vinny the cleaner," Grayson continued. "The man who makes problems disappear for Boston's elite families. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize the name? I've been in this city's power circles for 15 years. Finally, she turned to face him. Her composure was cracking, revealing the desperation underneath. "She's going to destroy everything you've worked for." "No, Dahlia. You were about to destroy everything I care about." He pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "I've already transferred $500,000 to your account. severance pay for 15 years of loyal service. But it comes with conditions. Sir, you have 2 hours to pack your belongings and leave this property. You will never contact my family again. You will never speak to the media about what happened here. And if I find out you've made any attempt to harm my daughter, I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure you spend the rest of your life in prison. Dahlia's mask finally slipped completely. You're choosing her over me? After everything I've done for this family? I raised those boys when you were too grief-stricken to function. I kept this house running when my wife was dying. Yes. And I'm grateful for that. Which is why you're leaving with money instead of in handcuffs. Grayson stepped closer, his presence filling the kitchen with quiet menace. But gratitude doesn't give you the right to decide who belongs in my family. She'll ruin you, Dahlia spat. The board will lose confidence. Your competitors will smell weakness. Everything Ilara died trying to protect. Ilara died trying to protect her children. All of them, including the daughter she thought she was saving by giving away. His voice softened slightly. I understand you thought you were doing the right thing. But loving someone doesn't give you the right to make their choices for them. Dahlia looked around the kitchen she'd commanded for 15 years, seeing it clearly for the first time as someone else's domain. What if I refuse to go? Then Torres will escort you out, and the severance package disappears. 2 hours later, Dahlia Chen drove through the mansion's gates for the final time, carrying 15 years of memories and the knowledge that sometimes love could become the very poison it sought to prevent. Behind her, the Hale family prepared to face the world together. The story broke on Channel 7's Evening News with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Good evening. I'm Rebecca Walsh with a Channel 7 exclusive. Tonight, we investigate the shocking secret that's rocking Boston's elite. Pharmaceutical billionaire Grayson Hale's hidden daughter, discovered living in poverty while her father built a multi-billion-dollar empire. Grayson sat in his living room with all 3 children, watching his carefully constructed privacy burn in real time. The twins pressed against his sides while Annalise perched on the edge of her chair, as if ready to run. The screen filled with aerial shots of the mansion, file footage of board meetings, and a particularly unflattering photo of Grayson from last year's charity gala. Rebecca Walsh's voice continued over the images. Sources close to the family say 10-year-old Annalise Kozlov appeared at the Hale estate 3 days ago, claiming to be the secret child of Grayson Hale and his deceased wife, Ilara. Tonight, we ask the questions Boston's elite don't want answered. Daddy, Callan whispered, are they going to take her away? Before Grayson could answer, his phone exploded with calls. Board members, investors, competitors smelling blood in the water. He let them all go to voicemail. The news segment cut to expert commentary from a child welfare advocate who'd never met any of them. If these allegations are true, the woman declared, we have to ask why Mr. Hale allowed his biological daughter to languish in the foster system while lavishing millions on charity organizations. Where was his paternal responsibility? Turn it off, Annalise said suddenly. Please, just turn it off. But Grayson kept watching, his jaw tightening with each accusation. No, we watch it all. We face it together. The segment concluded with Rebecca Walsh standing outside their gates. Representatives for Hale Pharmaceuticals declined our request for comment, but sources say the company's board is meeting in emergency session tomorrow. The question remains, can Boston's pharmaceutical prince survive this scandal, or will his empire crumble under the weight of family secrets? As the broadcast ended, silence filled the living room. Then Annalise stood abruptly. I should go, she said, her voice small but determined. I should disappear, and in a few months, people will forget, and everything can go back to normal. Sit down. Grayson's voice was calm but absolute. But the news, the board, your company, will survive or it won't. He pulled her back into the family circle, wrapping his arms around all 3 children. Do you know what I told the reporter who called this afternoon? Annalise shook her head. I told her that I just found my daughter after 10 years of believing she was dead. I told her that no amount of money, no business deal, no board position is worth more than that. And I told her that anyone who has a problem with my family can find themselves a new pharmaceutical partner. What if you lose everything? Joran asked. Grayson looked around at his 3 children, scared but together, facing the storm as a unit. Then I'll build it all again, he said simply. But this time, I'll do it with all my children by my side. Outside, camera flashes lit up the night, but inside the mansion, the Hale family held each other close and prepared to face whatever came next. Together, 3 weeks later, the media circus had mostly moved on to fresher scandals, leaving behind a mansion that felt fundamentally different than it had before Annalise's arrival. The change wasn't in the furniture or the decor. It was in the laughter that echoed through rooms that had been silent too long, in the chaos of 3 children racing through hallways that had once felt like a mausoleum. Annalise, come on. Callan called from the top of the grand staircase. You're going to miss the best part. She appeared at the bottom, grinning up at her brothers with an expression of pure joy that still took Grayson's breath away. 3 weeks in a real family had transformed her from a haunted waif into the vibrant child she was always meant to be. What's the best part? She called back. When Daddy tries to flip the pancakes and they stick to the ceiling, Joran shouted from the kitchen. All 3 children dissolved into giggles, and Grayson couldn't help but smile as he scraped burnt batter off the stove. His cooking skills hadn't improved much since Dahlia's departure, but somehow burnt pancakes tasted better when they were made with love instead of obligation. The twins had insisted on Sunday morning breakfast as a family tradition, and Grayson discovered he looked forward to these chaotic mornings more than any board meeting or business deal. Daddy, you're burning them again, Annalise observed, sliding into the kitchen and immediately taking charge of the griddle with the natural competence of a child who'd learned to be self-sufficient too young. What would I do without you? He asked, meaning it more than she probably knew. Starve, probably, she replied matter-of-factly, expertly flipping a perfect golden pancake. The business fallout had been significant, but not catastrophic. 3 board members had resigned, citing concerns about leadership judgment. 2 major investors had pulled their funding. Stock prices had fluctuated wildly for a week before stabilizing at a slightly lower level. But other investors had stepped up, drawn by Grayson's transparency and his refusal to compromise his family for profit. The company was different now, smaller in some ways, but more authentic, more human. Breakfast is served, Annalise announced, carrying a plate stacked impossibly high with perfect pancakes. They gathered around the kitchen table, not the formal dining room where they'd eaten silent, proper meals for years, but the cozy breakfast nook where conversation flowed as freely as the syrup. What should we do today? Grayson asked as the children devoured their food with the enthusiasm only kids could manage. Can we visit Mama's grave? Annalise asked suddenly. I want to tell her thank you. The twins nodded eagerly, and Grayson felt his throat tighten with emotion. They'd been to Alara's resting place twice since Annalise arrived, and each time he marveled at how natural it felt. 3 children talking to their mother, as if she were sitting right there with them. Of course, he managed. She'd love to see how happy you all are. Later that afternoon, as he watched his 3 children arrange flowers on Alara's grave while chattering about school and friends and dreams for the future, Grayson realized something profound. His wife's impossible choice had been wrong in execution, but right in spirit. She'd sacrificed her own peace to give their children life, all of them. Now it was his turn to honor that gift by giving them what they'd always deserved, a family whole and unbroken, ready to face whatever came next together. 2 months after the media storm, on a quiet December evening, Annalise found herself in the twins' room for what had become their sacred ritual. Bedtime stories, and the kind of deep conversations that only happen in the gentle darkness. Tell us about the scary parts, Callan whispered, curled up beside her on Joran's bed. About before you found us. Annalise had learned that her brothers needed these stories, not the sanitized version adults usually gave children, but the real truth about fear and loneliness, and what it felt like to believe you didn't matter to anyone in the world. The worst part wasn't being hungry, she said softly, running her fingers through Callan's hair the way she wished someone had done for her. It wasn't even being cold. It was lying awake at night wondering if anyone would miss me if I disappeared. Joran shifted closer, his small hand finding hers in the darkness. We would have missed you. Even when we didn't know you existed, we missed you. The simple truth of it still took her breath away. These boys had dreamed of her before they'd ever met her, had carried her absence like a phantom limb their entire lives. What about you? She asked. What was the scariest part after Mama died? The twins exchanged a look that held volumes of shared grief. When Daddy stopped smiling, Callan admitted. For almost a whole year he never smiled. We thought we'd lost him too. We used to sneak into his room at night, Joran added, just to make sure he was still breathing. Annalise's heart broke imagining these two little boys, barely 5 years old, keeping vigil over their broken father. But he came back to you. When you came home, Callan said simply. That's when Daddy started being Daddy again. That's when we all came back to life. They talked until the moon was high in the sky, sharing fears that seemed smaller when spoken aloud and dreams that felt more possible when witnessed by people who loved you unconditionally. I used to dream about having a sister, Joran confessed as they finally settled in for sleep. But I thought it was just pretend, like wishing for a unicorn or something impossible. I used to dream about having brothers, Annalise replied. 2 of them, with sandy hair and blue eyes and hearts big enough to love someone they'd never met. Do you think Mama knew? Callan asked sleepily. Do you think she knew we'd find each other eventually? Annalise thought about Alara's letter, about the careful way she'd preserved photos and documents, and hope for a reunion she'd never live to see. I think she counted on it, she said. I think she knew love was stronger than secrets, and that families always find a way back to each other. As her brothers drifted off to sleep, Annalise stayed awake a little longer, marveling at the miracle of belonging somewhere, of having people who would miss her if she disappeared, who carried pieces of her heart even when she wasn't there. For the first time in her life, she understood what home really meant. Not a place, but the people who choose to love you no matter what storms you weather together. And tomorrow, they'd wake up and choose each other all over again. 6 months after the scandal broke, Grayson sat in his corner office, reviewing quarterly reports that told a story he hadn't expected. Hale Pharmaceuticals hadn't just survived the media attention, it had thrived. The initial stock drop had been brutal, and losing those 3 board members had stung. But something unexpected had happened in the aftermath. Investors who shared his values had stepped forward. Customers had rallied around a CEO who'd chosen family over profit. Employees had worked harder, knowing they were part of a company that stood for something more than shareholder returns. Sir. His assistant knocked on the open door. The Forbes reporter is here for your interview. Grayson nodded, straightening his tie. 6 months ago, he'd have dreaded this conversation. Now, he looked forward to it. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Lisa Chun, settled into the chair across from his desk with her recorder ready. So, she began, let's address the elephant in the room. Your company's stock is up 30% from where it was before the scandal. How do you explain that kind of performance after such negative publicity? Grayson smiled. The genuine smile that his children had given back to him. People want to do business with companies they trust. When we were transparent about our family situation, when we refused to hide or spin the story, we showed our customers and investors who we really are. But you lost millions in the initial fallout. Money we made back within 3 months. He pulled up a chart on his computer screen. Turns out, authenticity is profitable. Who knew? Lisa laughed despite herself. Your competitors say you got lucky, that the sympathy factor saved you. Maybe they're right. Grayson leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. But I prefer to think we finally started operating from our true values instead of just talking about them. And those values are that family comes first, that transparency builds stronger relationships than secrecy, that the measure of a man isn't how much wealth he accumulates, but how well he protects the people he loves. Speaking of family, Lisa said, "How are your children adjusting?" The smile that crossed Grayson's face could have powered the building. They're thriving, all three of them. Annalise started at the twins' school in September, and she's already top of her class. She wants to be a doctor, says she wants to help sick kids the way her mama tried to help people. And the twins. They're finally whole. For the first time since their mother died, they sleep through the night. No more nightmares about missing sisters or broken families. As the interview wrapped up, Lisa asked one final question. "Any regrets about how you handled the situation?" Grayson looked out his office window toward home, where three children were probably doing homework and arguing over who got to feed the cat they'd adopted last month. "Only one," he said, "that it took me so long to understand what Alara knew all along. That love is the only empire worth building." 1 year later, the Hale mansion buzzed with an energy it had never known before. Strings of lights twinkled from every window, casting warm golden glows across the snow-covered gardens. The sound of laughter and music drifted from the grand ballroom, where three children ran between clusters of guests, their faces bright with excitement. It was Annalise's 11th birthday, her first real birthday party, and Grayson had spared no expense in making it magical. "Daddy, look." She appeared at his side, breathless and glowing, her dark hair adorned with the flower crown the twins had made for her. Mrs. Peterson from school came, and the Johnsons brought their whole family, and even cranky Mr. Walsh from down the street is here. Grayson followed her gaze around the room, taking in faces that represented their new normal. School friends and their parents, neighbors who'd initially whispered about the scandal, but had gradually warmed to the family's genuine happiness, business associates who'd stuck with them through the chaos, and even a few former foster siblings who'd tracked Annalise down through social media. "Are you happy?" he asked, kneeling down to her level. "So happy I could burst," she replied, throwing her arms around his neck. "Thank you for letting me have a real birthday, with a real family." Across the room, Callan and Joran were regaling a group of their classmates with a story of how they'd found their sister, a tale that had grown more dramatic with each telling, but never lost its essential truth about love conquering impossible odds. "You know what the best part is?" Annalise continued, still clinging to her father. "I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to act like someone I'm not to fit in. I can just be me, and that's enough." As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, the four Hales found themselves in the living room, surrounded by gift wrapping and the comfortable exhaustion that comes from a day well lived. "Read us the story," Joran requested, curling up against Annalise on the couch. She reached for the worn book of fairy tales they'd been reading together since that first night in the nursery. But instead of opening it, she looked around at her family, her real, chosen, fought-for family, and smiled. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice carrying the confidence of a child who finally knew her place in the world. "There was a girl who thought she was lost forever. But she wasn't lost at all. She was just taking the long way home. And when she got there," Callan prompted, though he knew the ending by heart. "When she got there, she discovered that home had been waiting for her all along. That love is patient and hope is stubborn, and that sometimes the best families are the ones you have to fight to find." As snow began to fall outside their windows and three children drifted off to sleep surrounded by wrapping paper and dreams, Grayson realized that Alara's impossible choice had led to something beautiful after all. Their family was different than it would have been, scarred by secrets and strengthened by truth, but it was theirs. Whole and unbreakable and full of tomorrows they'd face together. Stories like this show love is measured in loyalty and courage. Subscribe for more Aya's stories that inspire and transform. Because sometimes the best fairy tales are the ones we write for ourselves.